Okay, that's it. Sabira,
Alaikum, finally.
oh my God, this always happens.
Our
Assalamu
technology.
alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
And how are you?
I am good, alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. You know, there's always, I've not had a single live IG session where this doesn't happen. It always happens. So please accept my apologies.
Yeah, it's totally fine. It's okay. Completely okay. These things happen.
So,
Technology doesn't always work in our favor.
no, we are, I think, faster than this whole technology. Honestly, I think my mind is more faster. We are more quick, and this is simply delays, unnecessary delays. And so thank you so much, Sabira, for joining us. And you're joining us from Australia. So thank you so much. I'm not sure what time it is in Australia right now.
It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so we're
Oh, okay.
ahead of you.
So you're not bad. It's not bad.
No,
It's
no,
not
not bad at
like,
all.
Alhamdulillah. So Sabira is joining us from Australia, and she has been really, really kind to speak to us about the challenges on nutrition Muslims face during the Ramadan. And Sabira, if you could please introduce yourself and tell us about your work and your background, because uh, like what I find really interesting about you is that we don't get many, like when I started this work, we hardly had any Muslim dietitians, especially who knew about this complex field of disordered eating. And then, of course, we came across you and your understanding. So if you could tell us, please, thank you.
So my name's Saabria. I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. And I have been working as a dietitian for the last 10 years. And just like you mentioned, sister, there's not many Muslim dietitians working in the space of eating disorders. So I decided that this was my time to step up, because I personally have a big interest in working with eating disorders. So that's why I kind of did my professional development and got qualified. So in Australia, we have something called eating disorder credentials. So I'm an
Mhm.
eating disorder credential clinician with the Australian New Zealand Council of Eating Disorders. So I'm a dietitian, but I'm also a counselor. So I also, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah,
Yes.
because sorry, one sister said that they couldn't hear me. Um, so I'm also a counselor, and so I've done my counseling training in psychology, as well as I've also taken an interest in learning Islamic psychology as well. So that's kind of me in a little bit of a nutshell. I specialize in working with binge eating disorder,
Mhm.
but I also see all clients across the spectrum of eating disorders.
But Sabira, why this? I mean, 10 years ago, I know that eating disorders have always existed, but like I still, I'm really curious to know that do you know someone who experienced ED? How did you come across this illness, or were you studying in psychology and you developed an interest? What is the background of
I
your
have
interest in this?
I had a close friend who struggled with an eating disorder.
Uh-huh.
I think I personally probably experienced a lot of eating disorder traits without being
Hmm.
formally diagnosed. Um, so it was, I think my mind has always been in that space of disordered eating and eating disorders, with my own personal experience and watching one of my close friends struggle with an eating disorder. And it's also being like, I'm a Sri Lankan from background, so being in the South Asian community, there's not much understanding about eating disorders. That's what sparked my drive to learn more and also be one of our community to help others in our community with eating disorders.
Because Sabira, what it is, if you look at the size of New Zealand, which is like very tiny country when it comes to the population, but the number, the spectrum of the ED is very, very high. Like, and then you look at the Australia, like the numbers are insane, especially with the body shaming. That 1 in 5 or so Aussie, they experience body shaming. And then you mentioned Sri Lanka. So if we like look at these three countries, I mean, what is your experience of what is your personal view of the whole ED culture in these three countries and how they differ?
Uh, well, if you think my Sri Lankan background, I think it's probably not even spoken about in Sri Lanka. It's probably not in anyone's awareness that eating disorders are very much prevalent, especially body image concerns.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to countries like Australia and New Zealand, what I understand is that eating disorders are more prevalent because we have a wide variety of cultures, and so there's an element of identity that comes in, and trying to find an identity within a Western culture when you're coming from when we're migrating, because a lot of the majority of the population here are migrants, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's that migrant culture, the trying to figure out your identity, and then having that your confidence and your self worth varies,
Mm-hmm.
and that impacts your body image, which then impacts your eating behaviors. And because dieting is so prevalent in these countries, in the Western
Mm.
countries, what we do know is dieting is one of the biggest risk factors for eating disorders, and so then that's where the flow-on effect comes in.
Yes, it's a really interesting because you mentioned migrant culture, but when you look at the Japan and Korea, I mean, they are predominantly Japanese and Koreans, and they also, especially the Japan, has a very high rate of ED as well. I think maybe and Hong Kong. And when these are the countries which are mostly economically developed, but then when you look at the countries like Sri Lanka, I mean, these are least economically developed. I mean, the awareness maybe is minimal, but maybe the rate is not that high either, because yani the lifestyle and what is there occupies them mostly. So people don't really get much time, or I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's really different because one of my interests is, Sabira, I looking at why the numbers are so high in the most economically developed countries and why the numbers are different. It's not because of the awareness, but there are many other underlying factors. And
Definitely, and
but
I think with more developed countries as well, it also plays into the fact that success has an image for most
hmm,
people. So when people are aspiring to be successful, the way diet culture has worked is that looks like an image. It looks like a particular body shape, body size, and so as we kind of pursue for success or try to like get far in life, we feel a lot of people feel like, okay, to be able to do that, you need to have a certain body image,
yes, because
right? So success
Sabira,
plays a big part in it.
yes, I think that's a really good point because if you compare us to Qatar, like Afghanistan, where I come from, Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, and Bangladesh to Qatar and Emiratis, I mean, their size is small, but their number is quite significantly higher than us. And one of the biggest problem of awareness is, I mean, how do you cross those economical gaps, socioeconomic bridges, which divides the society from in many factions. I mean, it's very difficult to go into a remote village in Pakistan and where people don't even know about the body image and about the diet culture. And then you start explaining to them and they get into a shock because they've never heard of this and they don't want to know about it. So I think the country, the places I've seen, the remote places which have not been touched by this illness, they are fine, and maybe they don't even need to know about it. They're doing really, really well. But yes, it's really strange. I mean, I think especially we need a lot of research, honestly, and the more we look into this and the more we find, the more we can do something about it because they are really difficult to treat. And I mean, it's the cost of treatment in Australia, even I was looking at it. The waiting list is getting longer and longer and longer. As
Yeah,
yes, and
yeah,
it's a
no,
stiff, yeah.
it is very difficult, and I think that what you brought up is that there's a very big socioeconomic economic difference, and you'll find that the rural villages, they're untouched by this because they don't have that pressure to be successful or
No.
succeed or comparison. Everyone is, and there's so much more community, right? And when there's
Yes.
community and there's acceptance within your community,
Hmm.
you're not looking for outside acceptance. So there's so, like, eating disorders are so multifactorial, and there's so
Hmm.
many different things that play into part for it to come about as well.
Yes, and I think that's absolutely true because one of the first Muslim cases of eating disorder with the men, with the boys, came from Iraq when Iraq became occupied and was getting bombed. And this was in 23. And the interesting thing about the case study was that it was nothing to do with the diet culture or anything. It was simply that this person fell into not eating, and it was one of the very, very interesting case studies to come out of Iraq. So if we do look at the case studies, and they really, I mean, the difference, Sabira, like now the lot of case studies are coming out of Saudi Arabia, but before we had a lot of studies from Iran, and the reasons are completely different, and the culture and the pressure, and it's more towards where the success is a big factor. But even if you look at the Saudi Arabia and you compare their studies to the Australia, you will see that a lot of media plays a big part. That the more the society is getting exposed to international media, the more they feel pressured. And in Saudi Arabia, women don't get this kind of a pressure because, the dress code and everything, everybody kind of looks the same. But then the pressure does come from the other areas. So, yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
So,
No,
thank you. I
and
mean,
I quite
yes.
no, it was a good point that you mentioned. I think when it comes to body image and eating disorder prevalence, the reasons why different cultures experience it is different amongst the different regions. So as you mentioned, like a place like Saudi Arabia, the reasons why an eating disorder or body image concerns develop is very different to a Western country, and within the Western countries, it really differs between the cultures. And something that I'm working on as well in my own research is uh, being a cultured and a woman of faith in
Mm,
Australia. How is eating disorders different? How do they appear differently compared to um, you know that of someone of a different faith who have different cultural values to us? And there's differences amongst that because again, as Muslims, body image concerns isn't about showcasing our body. It's very different.
mm,
It comes with
mm.
different drivers for wanting to achieve a certain body image. Whereas for other cultures, it's very much, when I wear revealing clothes, I don't like the way my body looks. But for those of you know a cultured background of a Muslim faith, that's not the reasons why we have body image issues. It
No,
comes
you're,
from
yes.
no, sorry, sister.
Sorry, you were saying that it comes from,
It comes from a different place. It comes from more like the success or the influences, or this is
yes.
how we should be healthy, or this is how we need to look to be accepted within our community. It's not necessarily about the showcasing our body.
You're absolutely right. And I think that's something, I mean, that's why I spoke about Saudi Arabia. That if you look at Saudi Arabia, and even if you look at Iran, the dress code is same for the women. So, they are pretty much really, they don't even have to worry how they look when they go out. Yes, they just have to simply wear what they have to wear, and go out, and everyone is sane. But then the reasons are really, really different. I mean, even if you compare Iran to Saudi Arabia, you will see the different reasons. And then if you look at the more liberal countries like Turkey or Tunisia, or the difference in North Africa are different. But if you look at Algiers, which is Algeria, and you compare it to Jordan, which is Jordan, the reasons are really different. So it is, I mean, a lot to do with the media, but there is also so much else out there, which if we look into and if we can get on top of, I think it can really, really help resolve this dilemma which people are facing. But thank you, Saabria. This was really, really interesting, because to speak to you about the differences in Australia, because I was really shocked with what was coming out of Australia, because one of the mindset in Sri Lanka, Nepal, in my region, South Asia, is that the Western countries have the best healthcare system. So people really don't get ill, and if they do get ill, they're treated really quickly and they recover at a very speedy case, and that they're immune to all the illnesses. But the reality is completely opposite. So it's and if even you look at the Britain, I mean, I come from UK. I was born in UK, and I moved back to Pakistan last year. But the UK, the waiting list is ridiculous. I mean, it is, and the NHS is under so much pressure, Saabria, because it costs. It's not cheap. You at least need per person who's on the who can qualify for this healthcare. At least I think NHS is paying maybe up to 5,000 per week, and this is simple, just for the daycare. And this is not even a full time. And whereas in America, I know someone, during the pandemic, underage, not that an underage, but a teenager, she was struggling with an eating disorder, couldn't qualify for the help even on the insurance system. So the parents had to pay $1,000 a day just so she could be in this environment and she could get treated. And whereas if here, there is no way. I mean, you can say to people in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Nepal, or Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, whatever, every country which surrounds us, that this is, how much you need. There is no way, Saabria. And I think this is where the effective treatment method really has to come into play ASAP, because the longer you leave it, the more difficult it gets. And but I wanted to ask you one more question before we move on to our Q&A. I mean, have you seen the recovery rate? Have you seen the difference between the Muslims and the non-Muslims, especially in the developed countries, which is like your side, and I can even bring in the Britain from my side, in comparison to the least developed countries like Asia and some of the Middle East countries?
I haven't actually looked into the recovery rate difference because there's not much studies that
Mm.
really look at Muslims compared to non-Muslims, I guess, essentially, and the recovery there. I think we all kind of fall into one in terms of the recovery rate. But you touched on a really good point, like the system for eating disorders is only up and coming in Australia. So it was only 2019 that it was actually included as part of our Medicare system, which is the government-funded system
Mm.
that we started actually getting funding for specific eating disorder treatment in a more general practice kind of setting, in a private practice kind of setting. And even the beds in hospital are quite limited. Yes, there are day programs like around, but again, they're very hard to get into, and it's not as easily accessible. I
Mm.
mean, what I would expect is that if, like, for a recovery rate amongst non-Muslims versus Muslims, if kind of Islamic lens was put onto eating disorder care,
Mm.
an Islamic psychology lens was put onto eating disorder care, I would expect that would help and aid recovery.
Mm.
But I also do know that like a lot of people struggle, especially around the binge eating disorder. A lot of
Mm.
people struggle in seeking help to start off with because they feel like it's a problem of their nafs and they feel like
Mm.
their iman is low, and that's why they struggle with binge eating disorder. So it's hard to say because I also think that the Muslim community doesn't take eating disorders as seriously as maybe they should, and that probably adds to one of the reasons why that it's not studied as much as well. The difference.
I mean, I think what I was trying to say was because comparing because I only deal with the Muslims, and I was
Yeah.
looking at the Muslims from the West, like who had ED in Britain. in comparison to the ED in Pakistan, which is the least developed country. And I was looking at the recovery rate. I mean, where did they recover faster? The duration of the recovery time. And what I experienced that, like in UK, we have this community system where the community, not the community, but the community mental health team, which intervenes. They use intervention methods like sectioning and everything when it comes to that point. So we do have a community mental health team. And then, I mean, I've seen that there are, like, I cannot name the cases. For instance, there is someone who's had it for like 12 to like over 10 years now. And it comes to the point where even NHS cannot do anything more about it. So then you are placed under the community mental health team. But whereas here what I see, because people don't have this kind of money and resources, so what happens when the families intervene and they step in, Saabria, yes, and there is a pressure to get well, and then there is a safeguarding issue, which comes into the play, and then the families, like when they take matters into their own hands. I see that people in that, I wouldn't say are controlled, but in that protective environment, they recover more faster. For example, because the eating disorders, they thrive in secrecy, yes. When I was in UK, we had a lot of freedom, yes. There is, I mean, and even the Muslims, girls who live in UK, they can have their way, yes. It is your way, you can have your space, you can have your freedom. But whereas if you come to the Pakistan and Bangladesh, because we all live together, so this secrecy, it's no longer a secret. So you're really exposed, which is very frustrating for us because we want it to remain hidden. We don't want to be exposed, and then we are exposed. And because you're exposed, you don't have a choice but to recover. So when I when I look at the recovery rates, one of the things I saw was that, people don't even get a choice. I mean, that they have a free will to stay with this disorder, like what happens in the West. You can take your time, you choose if you want to recover, right? It has to be, you have to agree to the therapy. You can never, but here, whereas here, because you're all the time, everyone is living together, your habits at the dining table are exposed. And then there is a pressure. And the pressure doesn't just come from the one person, it comes from so many people that I see that half of the time that the ED dies a very horrible death because of the exposure it gets. And people, and then, it's a mindset. And then when the mind changes, they proceed forward. So I think, inshallah, I think that's one area I really want to look into more deeply, the recovery rates. And because, so we can learn from each other, and it can become very cost effective, and it's available to all. Because right now, absolutely no way. Like, there was someone from Algeria, there is no way. I mean, we tried to get her to, we thought maybe she'll recover in UK, and they were quoting us 60,000 just for this is in sterling. I think that's 90,000 in yours for 6 months. And that minuses the cost of living and where she would stay. It's like, it's not like every day you're performing a major surgery on her. And then it's simply a talking and counseling someone and changing their mindset and their behaviors. So yes, it's quite interesting. So anyway, we'll get to
I'm
this.
glad you brought up. Sorry, I just want to add to that.
Yes.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think one of the biggest differences, as you said, the secrecy, and we know that like evidence-based practices, family-based therapy is very effective in managing anorexia and eating disorders. But in the Western world, everyone's so busy. Families are so busy.
Mm.
Like parental intervention for the child to do family-based therapies, they need to like leave their jobs essentially to be a full-time carer for someone with an ED. Whereas with what you said, like in places like Pakistan or in the South Asian community, we're always surrounded by people. We're always surrounded by family, and it's not just the parents that need to be involved in that are often involved in the care. It is the whole family. It's the family unit. It's the uncles, the aunties, and I
Mm.
think that connection also makes a very big difference. It's the ED would probably die a very hard death in that case because it has no rule, it has no influence. And if you think of the ED, and as we classify the ED, it's the ED voice, right? So the eating disorder voice when it's outshone by the voice of the village that surrounds that person with the ED. And therefore, that makes a lot of sense when you look at it in terms of family-based therapy of why it would be more successful.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember there was a case from we have an area which is Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is north of Pakistan. It's the Pakhtuns, so they're very disciplined. And I remember from the mother, she said she lost all hope when she was in America with her daughter. Nothing was working. Like every day the daughter would go back to her original behaviors because the mother was working, the father was working, the therapy wasn't working, because you just couldn't control her when they were not with her. Even when they were with her, she said every mealtime was a nightmare, because you would sit and like a 20-minute or 30-minute would be like 1 hour 40 minutes, the tantrums, you would leave it, then you would go back. She said we would some days spend a day just trying to get her to finish one meal. And she said forget the meal plans. And she said, they came to during the COVID, they came to Pakistan, and they kind of got stuck. And she said when the father-in-law, he was so disciplined, he had such a discipline in the house. He said no, everybody sits together at the breakfast table, at the lunch table, they had set times, and everybody eats. And she said, when she was there, and he said, why is she having a different food? Can't she eat with everyone? So she said, we were shocked. We said, no, she has a specific meal plan. She said he wouldn't agree to that. So she said, my daughter was forced to eat with everyone. And then she would see that the minimum requirement was that, minimum everyone has to eat this and the max. And if you want to go for the seconds, you can. And she said she got influenced by them, by eating with them. She started eating like them. And she said by the time we went back to America, she said she had such fixed eating habits from Pakistan that she continued with them, that she would even make her own meals based on that. And she said, because my father-in-law, and he said, it doesn't make sense. He said, we all are eating this and she's eating different, and it takes away the blessings from the table. So she said, she gave a tantrum one day, then the second, and she said third day, she said it started working. And she said, I was so shocked, because she said, I went to Pakistan. She said with her oatmeal, with her, peanut butter, with her seeds and all the nuts and nut butters and every single thing. And she said, I just had to leave everything there. So yes, I think it's really strange how sometimes different things work. So Sabira, we'll get to the Q&A. Um, I think I did send you the questions, yes? Yes.
You did. Okay, thank
So
you.
the first question was is coming from Lebanon, and actually we get a lot of questions from these areas. And she said, before the war, my diet was different, and now we are rationing. In Lebanon, food prices are very high. Breakfast, cheese, bread, olives. Lunch, usually the same. Evening, rice, soup, meat, bread, veg, salad, depending on what is available. The fiber is little, as the staples have become a necessity. How to cope with this situation and stay on path of recovery. And she said she struggles with anorexia.
Yeah. It's a hard one because obviously the supply of food is limited. So with that, it's kind of like forced famine, in a way. It's like a forced anorexia, unfortunately, forced starvation. That's there. I think it sounds like her worry is that she's not getting enough fiber. And although that's a worry, I think it's what we need to focus on is what is there, what can we have from what is available from us, and how can we curate a meal from that as best as possible. And I know that it's hard. It's a very broad question. It's like it depends on if there's a meal plan already in place. So do you have a meal plan that you're content with, and has that been shifted? And I think there's a lot of similar questions from whatever it is that because of things like the war or situations or traveling or whatever it is, where what you would normally have on a meal plan changes or has to change because of the situations or circumstances. The best thing to do is actually get your meal plan and go, how can I adapt this meal plan based on what's available to me, right? Because if you think about it, if your meal plan says that you're having a slice of toast for breakfast,
Mm.
right? What's an alternative that you can get with what's in front of you? And if you have something like cheese, bread, and olives, and that's what's available, what part of that feels safe for you to have, and what part of it do you have to? I mean, and so it's about going with, this is my meal plan, this is what's available with for me, and what can I have in between, in between those two, that I can consume and still be eating as regularly as possible. I mean, does that answer the question, Sister?
Yes, I think Sabira, I mean, thank you for bringing it up because it reminded me when I was in the ED unit. And for example, if you didn't wanted a tuna, then they would present you with the alternative. And if you don't want that, then there is next and next and next. So, I mean, we shouldn't be focusing on what is, yani, that we have to, because Sabira, one of the problem is people go online and they look at sample meal plan. And then when they and then they follow these recovery influencers, and they look at their meals and they get very confused. They think, they need to have salmon, they need to have avocado, they need to have flax seeds, chia seeds, and everything. And that's not realistically what, is our food. So what you're saying is, if, for example, I mean, my breakfast at the unit was 2 pieces of toast with 2 spreads like butter and jam. There was a 200 ml glass of yani orange juice, and then there's a breakfast with 200 ml of milk. So the bread, the toast becomes replaced with the naan bread, which
Oh
is
yeah,
normally
yeah,
the
or a
case in,
roti.
yeah, yes. And the fats can be cheese.
Yeah.
Like my fat came from the butter spread. Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the sugar can be like a date or something. So so what's the, don't focus on what is like what is available, focus on that, because there is in food we have such a variety that there is always a replacement for something.
There is, and I think, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, that there's similarities within cultures, and I think you know the world is trying to become Western when we have so many cultural foods that are
Mm,
very much similar in rations if we actually look at it. So, for example, as you said,
mm,
like, if you're in the West, then it's grains is most common, right? So,
mm,
like toast would be common breakfast, and but if you're from South Asia, it'd be some sort of roti. It would be either a chapati, a naan, or whatever, and they're very similar. They're very
mm,
similar concepts. They're very similar ingredients. They're made in very similar ways. They're just different depending on the region you come from. So try not to limit yourself from in a particular meal plan, because when you have a particular meal plan for recovery
mm,
and you feel like that's the only thing you're allowed to
mm.
follow, then that itself is a restriction, right? So
Yes.
it's going, if especially when you have, whether if you go to a new country or you go to, you're on a holiday for a little while, what you want to do as much as possible is go, what's my similarities here? What can I adapt for this? So if you're going, like, if you are wanting to have, if your meal plan says that you need to have roasted potatoes and there's no potatoes available, well, what's the next carb that you can have that's appropriate to the culture that you're from? And I think a lot of people with recovery and dietitians are probably a big culprit in this. Is we often we learn to prescribe Western cultures food, and that
Mm,
might not sit with the culture that the person is from, and that's something that I know is changing with education and understanding of
mm,
different cultures. But I think it's also coming from the person receiving it to realize
mm.
that their cultural food can be quite healthy if eaten in the right ways or if understood properly.
And I think that's a very valid point, because Sabira, one of the mistakes I made, like when I used to speak to people and I would completely forget, and I would be like, no, she needs to have avocado, she needs to have butter. And the poor mothers would be so confused, and I forgot they cost a fortune in these countries, like to get an avocado. because we don't, it's not from our, it's not what we produce. And then telling a mother that, the daughter needs a tuna, or she needs to have a salmon, or, she needs to have roast potatoes. I mean, it was, and then I understood that, it's different, what I'm saying is completely wrong. And you're right. I mean, if you study a culture, for example, you study even in Pakistan, because we have 4 provinces, the food is different from one place to the other. So if you study and look into that and prescribe, it is so much more economically effective, and it's also so much better.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And this is a really important one. She said she suffers from gallstones, and which is a result of her ED, which I mean, the doctor said it's because of her limited intake of food with her anorexia. And so she still doesn't believe it, but she said, they've told me to change my diet and how I can get through Ramadan with this issue and not relapse. Because it's really
Mm.
tricky, because with the gallstones, your diet does become kind of restricted and limited.
Yes. So with gallstone diet, you're expected to go on a low fat, low dairy diet from memory. It's been a while
Mm,
since I worked with clients with gallstones. But I think the main thing here is how to get through Ramadan without with a fear of relapse. And I think what's really, really, really important is fasting itself can be a trigger for eating disorders. And so if you have a history with of an ED, and especially an eating such as anorexia, then is fasting suitable for you in the first place is a question that you need to speak to your doctor, your imam, your sheikh, whoever it is about. Um, is that the right decision for you? Because if the act of fasting is putting you at risk for a relapse, then maybe that's not the right thing for you. Maybe Ramadan means something different for you. Maybe it's that you focus on your other points of worship and instead of fasting. Because I think it's something that we need to talk about is that uh, people with eating disorders can be exempt from fasting um, because it's a
mm,
serious mental health condition, it's a serious physical health condition, and triggering that is unhealthy for the body in any way. But if you know despite all that, we still want to fast and we still want to, you know, continue fasting. I think it's really advisable to do your best. So making sure that you are eating appropriately at suhoor and iftar time.
mm. You're right. And okay, this is, she said her biggest issue is her in-laws spending Ramadan with her. And she said she sees them after years. She said they don't eat out and she doesn't cook. She said my meals are delivered as I follow a Pacific diet due to lactose issues and wheat allergy. I feel this Ramadan will be difficult. I'll feel judged for not cooking and not eating with them. How can I overcome this issue?
I mean, sometimes it sounds like a conversation needs to be had maybe with the mother-in-law,
Mm,
explaining the situation that she's in. But then it's also going, is there anything that she could cook or learn to
mm,
cook that would be lactose free and wheat free as well, that maybe the rest of the family can have and or they can have together. Maybe not at every meal, but maybe for some meals so that she doesn't feel fully left out. But I think it's really, really important is that conversations need to be had here,
mm,
explaining situations, explaining like this is how I feel, this is what my situation is, and when when there's conversations and there's often understanding, right? I know it can be hard with in-laws, but because sometimes there's not an understanding, or they might not understand
mm,
what the problem is. Because again, eating disorders are not well understood, but
mm.
still, I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, and questions need to ask you, like, would you be able to cook um, for you guys, for yourself, because I have these issues and I actually don't know how to cook. Or is
Yes.
she willing to learn how to cook certain simple dishes that she could still serve to the family, but also that feels safe for her? Because I know, like, I know one, like, as part of the recovery journey, we do encourage that they are able to move past their meal plans and for them to be more flexible with their eating
Mm.
and trying to do more self cooking and self preparation, because sometimes meal plans can get expensive, especially if you're outsourcing all your meals. It can get expensive with time. And so we do
Yes.
try to encourage as much as possible self-preparation of food. It also encourages flexible eating, and it also helps us on that journey of recovery, right? Because a lot of people feel, and with some of the questions that we've been getting as well, what I'm understanding is there's this thought that recovery means that I am eating as per a meal plan every single
Mm.
day, and I'm eating that, and that's enough for me. And that's, although that's a pathway to recovery, recovery is to be able to eat without a meal plan, to be
That's a
like
really
fully
good
recovered.
question. Yeah. That's a really good answer. So thank you. Well done for that. And so this one is she's in Kuwait because of the war. She said last Ramadan we followed a meal plan and everything was okay, fine. We don't have help here. And I feel my mother and aunt have lost interest in my recovery. They show little interest in cooking, and for the past months, I've been expected to eat with them without a protest. I'm losing my mind. I'm not fasting, and can you recommend how I can get through this situation? I'm terrified and I cannot survive without my meal plan. I panic if I don't eat the food, which is my safe food. Again, you're
Yeah,
restricted, you're chained to this meal plan.
exactly what I was also feeling.
Yeah.
Like there's this chain to recovery means that I have to be stuck to this meal plan. I also think that she's probably really struggling with that eating disorder voice more than anything. I think there's a lot of that's happening. It's not necessarily that she's losing her mind because she's eating foods that are not safe for her, right?
Mhm.
Or she doesn't consider safe. It's more that the eating disorder voice is becoming unbearable for her, right? And so that would require therapy in its own sense, but also sometimes with consistency of eating outside of your meal plans or eating foods that are unsafe, we're challenging ourselves. And one of the things that we do as part of recovery as on the recovery journey with eating disorder is expanding the number of safe foods by challenging ourselves to eat
Mhm.
different types of foods. So it might just be a mindset shift rather than going, oh, they are just forcing me to eat these kind of foods. It might be looking at it from a different lens and being like, maybe they're challenging me, or maybe I can take it as a challenge, right? Because when you have that mindset shift of the approach, then you don't feel like they're neglecting you. Because at the moment, what I'm hearing from this girl is that, oh, person, girl, guy, I don't know, is that she feels like she's being neglected, right? But
Mhm.
by her parent, mother, and her aunt, and I think if she tries to change it, maybe she changes her viewpoint on that, right?
Mhm.
And go, maybe they're challenging me, or maybe I can use this as a challenge because, I mean, coming from a war and going to a different country takes an emotional toll of everyone, right, including the mother and the
Mhm.
aunt. So it's looking at it from a lens of understanding as they're trying to do the best they can while dealing with their own emotions and going, well, what's the role I can play here to
Mhm.
help them and support them as well as supporting myself because I mean essentially they're still giving her food to eat, they're still making her eat
Mhm.
regularly, they're still making sure she gets her caloric intake. And with eating disorder recovery, I mean I'm just talking from example point of view. It's like if you go to inpatient at a
Mhm.
hospital here in Australia, they're not going to ask you what your safe foods are. They're not going to make sure that you're having your safe foods.
No.
They're just going to be like, food in, you need this many calories. How are we going to get that in for you? Because that's
Yeah.
what recovery is. It's making sure that you're eating enough calories to support
Mhm.
your body's general functioning and your body's needs.
Mhm.
And so, again, we're falling into that. I'm on a meal plan. This is enough for me. The
Mhm.
reason that meal plan is enough if it's meeting your caloric needs, and you can still get that from other things as long as you're eating.
Yeah. And Sabira, I think it's also distracting yourself from the reality, avoiding the reality when you are, and the ED does have this power to make you live in unreal world, in surreal life. Because I mean, now look at it, this is a war situation. Normally people yeah, I mean, the family if, thinks that food is just there for a survival. They're not focused. Their focus is different. But whereas she doesn't see, her mind is occupied by this voice. So it has taken
Yeah,
her far away from the reality and has shielded her from the realities of life. So it is like entering into this completely different world where the only thing exists is this voice and making sure that you follow the voice. So, Allah help
And that's
everyone.
the reality of
Yeah.
the eating disorder and eating
Yes.
disorder voice. It's like a little shaitan in your ear kind of situation where it's driving your choices, it's driving your thoughts, it's driving your choices. And a lot of
Mm.
people who experience eating disorders feel very trapped, right? And
Mm.
and that's why they feel very stuck, is because they're stuck in their own mind where they can't see anything past food, calories, how I
Yes.
look, appearance. So that's all that's in their mind, and it's interesting how like she's uh, seeing her mother and aunt in a light of they've lost interest in me. They don't care
Mm.
about my recovery. Well, that's probably far from their thoughts, but they're probably trying to
Yes.
survive the day to day of the war. But they're still
Mm.
seeing it only from the lens of food and eating, which is again not in blame of her in any way, shape, or form, but it's very much showcasing the reality of the eating disorder. That even though there's conflict around you, the battle is really within.
Then absolutely, honestly, so this is she said she switched her diet 7 years back. She's married, and she feels judged by her husband on how much she spends on food. She said she doesn't eat with her in-laws because they eat traditional Pakistani food, and her choices are Mediterranean and Western, completely lifted from the internet diet plans. The issue is I don't want to make a switch because I feel this diet has kept me on the path to recovery, but at the same time, it's costing a lot of money. I never had to worry about the money at my parents' house, and I also had a personal chef. Here we have one chef who doesn't know how to cook my food. I'm getting tired of spending so much time in the kitchen. The meal preps don't work for me, and my stress level is very high. I feel I will relapse. What shall I do?
I'm interested in your thoughts on this, sister. Before I get started, what are your thoughts on this question?
I honestly, I'll be very honest to you. I'm so like with what is happening around us here, when you get these kind of questions, they really baffle you. They really do. I mean, I don't know. We don't like our only personal chef is our mother. That's the personal chef we used to
Or
get, and
ourselves?
then yeah, ourselves. So I don't know. I mean, I honestly I had no answer for her that, I mean, she knows, she's aware, she's spending a lot of money, yes, because as I said to you, that this whole um, culture of following the diet plan, celebrity diet plan, and watching these unreal videos, yes, what I eat in a day, and then
Yeah,
following them. I think she's just making things more difficult for her. She needs to simplify her lifestyle, yes,
yeah,
and maybe accept the culture she comes from. It comes from the acceptance, because this is what Allah gave her. And rather than being judgmental, maybe, have a mixture of both. Maybe have 2 days with the her food. It's also very cost effective. Sabir, I'll give you an example. What she's spending, like if I buy what she buys, yes, yes, and our food budget will be 80% higher, yes. But I eat, yes, what my family eats, yeah, and it's like the 10% of what she's spending. So that's the best. I mean, because the products she's using, they are not produced here. They come from um, country, yes, West, and then there's a tax. So our government
oh,
has put tax on foreign. Yes, so when they come, so you're not like paying three a Australian dollar. You're paying $6 Australian, or maybe seven.
okay. So
So
I guess
yes,
yeah.
yeah, I just thought to myself, my God, this is insane. She needs to simplify her life and really become very realistic that this is not an ideal way of living. Because when she has children, what is she going to do then? And yes,
So I guess my take on this is I kind of understand where she's coming from for the first. I'll just say that firstly, and also I'm going to have to say this, that it's probably the last question I can answer because I have to run off and
yes,
take my kids to madrasa.
mm,
So I will just mention that I I understand where she comes from. So her choices to follow a Mediterranean diet is coming, and a Western diet is coming from the wellness culture of, and the very much researched diet. The Mediterranean diet is one of the most highly researched diets, and they found that they're very good for your body's health and well-being, right? And so based on that, so we've got conditions such as like orthorexia, which is very much about clean eating and following these wellness trends. And so if you look at that, look at her in that from that lens, she's following these diets because she feels like they're evidence based and everyone's talking about them as it's the best diet on the planet. And you know what? There's a lot of good things about that diet, right? But it's one of the most highly spoken about diets is because it's the one that has been allocated a lot of money towards to be researched, right? And so and this is what me and a lot of my culture dietitians say is that if that same amount of money and focus was put on all of our cultural diets, we will find that they live up to very much like the Mediterranean diet. We all have very much similar aspects in our diet that's very similar to the Mediterranean diet. So, the Mediterranean diet talks about eating lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. Now, I'm from Sri Lanka, and that's one of the staples in our diet as well. We have a lot of vegetable curries that we eat, and so it's with this lady. What I would suggest is, again, what I've been suggesting throughout this live is look at that Mediterranean diet and go, what aspects of this diet do I have in my Pakistani diet, right, or in the Pakistani food, and then incorporate that into the Pakistani food, right, so that you're not going, I'm only eating Western diet. You go, what part of my Pakistani foods are healthy that I can have, right? Rather than having to go, okay, I can only follow this kind of diet, which is again, when you're not able to be flexible with your diet, that's already a sign that you're well and truly in your eating disorder as well, right? You're within that restriction, and you haven't got the freedom around food choices. So, but if as we're working through and we're getting comfortable with making these food choices, it's going, okay, what parts of this Mediterranean diet can I find in my cultured diet, and how can I use that and eat more of those things that will become more cost effective? For example, Mediterranean diet talks about, again, plenty of fish, right? So then what part of the Pakistani diet has fish in it? What can I start consuming that's more local that is having fish in it? Yes, the Mediterranean diet talks about salmon, but salmon is not accessible in Pakistan. So what fish is accessible? That very much. What other fishes can I have that can meet that fish criteria? That's it. It's a criteria. It's a fish criteria. What's inside a fish is protein, the omega-3 fats, and so plenty of other fish have the same kind of profile, right? That's more accessible for you. So it's looking at what is that, what's that alternative, what's that swap that I can make, right? And then teaching the chef that you have of preparing it.
Yes, and you're absolutely right, because we do use freehand with oil sometimes. And what you said about the fish, I looked into the fishes in Pakistan and I was shocked. Like there were 50 fishes came on my local delivery site. And I was like, my God, this is like so confusing, because here the fish is seasonal. If something is in season, you will get. If it's not in the season, so you will not have an access to that kind of a food all year round. I mean, now in March we don't get fish because the fish is only like any December, Jan, and Feb. This is the season. They are, yes. So, and even with the vegetables, so I think what she's trying to follow, and the problem with her is that the food she wants to have, it's not seasonal. And here you will only get seasonal. Honestly, Saabria, you will only get seasonal things. They're out of season, khalas, it's finished. You will not get them.
That's actually very beneficial for you, right? Because I mean, even in Melbourne, you can get certain fruits all year round, certain vegetables all year round, but there's certain things that are only for seasons, and if you eat them within the seasons, you actually get the benefits for them. The reason we're growing that season is because they're beneficial to be eaten in that season, right? So it's really
Yes.
highly, like, we highly encourage it to eat seasonally, right? Because you don't need to be eating mandarins all year round. It's going, what season does that produce in? Okay, it's produced in winter, which makes sense because it has a high vitamin C level, right? And
Mm,
so it helps with the immune system during the winter
mm,
months. And so that's why it's produced in winter, so that if we eat more seasonally, right, and eat to the land as
mm.
well, then we're actually going to be better off in our own health and well-being as well, rather than trying to follow a diet that doesn't suit our culture.
Thank you, Sabira. This was a really, really excellent answer to end our conversation, because this is the message I wanted to give everyone. Eat local, eat seasonal, and eat from the land. I mean, it's cost effective, and it doesn't, and what you said, you can always adapt.
Yeah,
And it's more beneficial. And what you said about, how I never thought about this, that, the orange juice, you cannot have it all year round. Our orange season is finishing, it's coming to an end, and we get different fruits in now. So it will be not, and even if you go out and you ask people in the shop, they will be shocked. The only orange juice you will get is, the international brand. So, yeah, so you don't need to have orange juice in summer, because God is giving you already a natural vitamin C. So your
yeah.
VC is coming from the sun. So we need to be mindful of that. So any last messages, Sabira, before we go?
I think what from the questions we've got in, one of the last things that I want to say is, one of the important part of recovery is to become free from your meal plan. Your meal plan shouldn't
Hmm.
become another rule that you follow, right? And
Hmm.
so that's a part of the journey to recovery, is that we break free from this, or we look to expand our meal plans so that it's no longer day to day, this is the only thing we can eat. It's supposed to give you freedom. It's supposed to teach you how to eat. And I guess another thing as well with Ramadan coming is, if you are not well, if you have an eating disorder, think about whether Ramadan is the month that you should be, if you should be fasting during this month, right? Or if your worship looks different during the month.
The very good answer to the whole Ramadan thing is, an imam in the UK said to me, he said, if the doctor says you cannot fast, then that's it. So before you go to the imam, you have to speak to your doctor, because the decision about your fasting has to come from your doctor. So if the doctor says you cannot fast, then go and speak to your imam. And then what they will do is maybe ask you that, okay, don't fast throughout the month, but maybe on the odd nights, like 21, 23, 25, prepare yourself. So which works better. And the last thing I really wanted to say was, it completely slipped my mind, Sabira, but something you mentioned, which was so, mashallah, excellent. And about, yes, and I really liked it, what you said. And honestly, I think even I am guilty of doing that. And I made my family's life very difficult. No, it has to be this, and I am guilty of bringing food from Britain to Pakistan, yes, and really making things difficult for my family, because no, you have to bring my cereals, you have to bring Horlicks, you have to bring this and that, and even the fish. I mean, I would tell them, no, I need to have this. So now, Alhamdulillah, like, I don't want to do that anymore. I just, it scares me to do that. So what I take from you, free your mind from all these food thoughts, so your soul, spirit, and your heart and everyone is free. Don't become chained to these things, because they really restrict you and they make you keep stuck in the prison. And so, yeah, thank you so much. We did take so much from you, and thank you so much for being so compassionate and so understanding towards what is happening in the world and why people are suffering. Because the way you came in, the way you explained the whole war situation and everything, it really shows a lot of compassion, and how we also have to be compassionate, broaden our thinking, get out of this limited thinking, and be more free. So thank you so much, and have a really good Ramadan, and have an excellent evening. Thank you.
Thank you
Assalamu
so much for
alaikum.
having me on here. Inshallah, so everyone has benefited. Walaikum.
Yes. Wa alaikum salam. Thank you.